Afternoon, everyone. Just afternoon. Whether people are at their lunch right now and watching this, who knows? Just give it a few seconds to let people filter in after their last meeting, I'm sure. How are you both today?
Very well, thanks, Danny. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Well, great. We're going to get started because we've got a lot to unpack today. So thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, where we're going to be discussing how to build a transformative data academy. So today we're joined by two really brilliant guests. We've got Phil, Interim CDO and Head of Digital, and Kate, Head of Digital Product and Strategy at the Coventry Building Society, who really paved the way with that an award-winning data academy. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Phil and Kate to do an introduction to themselves. Phil, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, can do. I need to update my picture, don't I? I've got old since then. Um, so I lead the data office at Coventry Building Society. I've been doing that for about 15 months. Prior to that, I've been head of digital at the society, which clearly, from a digital perspective, the amount of reliance it has on data to succeed is significant. So felt a natural progression to move into this role and lead the data office.
Brilliant. Okay.
Yes, so hi everyone. I'm the head of data products and strategy, and so my responsibilities are to ensure that we deliver brilliant data products that deliver the insight that the organisation needs. But I'm also responsible for data culture and the data academy at the society. I joined Coventry Building Society back in September 2023 after over 20 years at Royal Mail. So nice to see you all.
Perfect. Great. So we'll start with just framing the session outcomes today. We frame all our webinars and classes like this. So by the end of today, you'll have learned how to build a strategic data culture engine that delivers high business impact. Understand how to align data education with trust, with governance and digital transformation, and walk away with some proven approaches to cohort design, stakeholder engagement, and measurement. But before we go in, we just want to do a bit of a pulse check in the room on who's currently has a data academy set up. So I'll just give a few minutes for those to be answered. I'm always curious with this because you don't know before you come in. Give it a couple more seconds let people answer. Great, so where are we at? Okay, so we've got some yeses, we've got a good mix actually. So some yeses, so I'm sure in the comments we'll start to see some different approaches or some compounding approaches to what we talked to today. 14% in development. So hopefully today helps you move into that yes or the no. Maybe there's a bit more work there. And more in the no actually. So hopefully you leave quite inspired and you've got some tips to put in your toolkit to start to get yours off the ground. So perfect. Great. That's a good pulse check. So before we get into the real juice of the webinar, I just want to briefly cover the data and AI literacy curve, which in essence is Data Literacy Academy's people approach to the maturity curve. And what we tend to see is a definite inclination for when starting data programs or data academies is that organizations start at the middle or the top of the curve. But by doing so, there's circa 80% of the organization that will be at that start of their journey where they don't have that confidence, the language, or that terminology understanding. And something that Coventry truly embraced and have seen results of tenfold and winning awards as a result of that was creating that foundation of ensuring they meet people where they're at, putting some frameworks in place or in parallel to the tool. So when people are further up that journey, they've got the enablement that's in place. So I just wanted to frame that before we get really stuck into that now. So here we get going. So if you take us back to the early days, what did that landscape look like at Coventry when you first set out to build the Data Academy? And I guess we'll start with Phil and then we'll hand over to you, Kate.
So I'll give a view, because actually when Kate and team started it, I wasn't in the team at that time. I was actually more of a stakeholder. So leading the digital department as it was, if I'm being honest, we were struggling to get insights. We're struggling to really understand what the data was telling us. And I think there was a lot of nervousness around the organization, and particularly in my team, around what questions we needed to ask. And are we confident in data? And people, when they're not confident in stuff, just shy away from it. And if you do that, then clearly what happens is you're not curious enough to lead that out. And I think it was one of the reasons why I moved over to the data office, really, was because the curiosity to make sure that we were driving it forward. But and I think the academy was sort of directly targeted at that, but Kate probably more qualified to come in at that point and talk about the drivers and motivation behind it initially.
So yeah, when I joined in September, the data office was newly formed in I think the July of 2023. So alongside the newly formed data office, they brought together, data professionals. The data strategy had been developed, the first data strategy, and that included an empowerment pillar. And a key way of delivering that empowerment was through the setting up of a data academy. So I think that the landscape across the society was that there was a strong desire to improve ways of working with data, but there wasn't really the ability to do so. So we didn't have a platform that would meet the needs of the self-service model that we wanted to encourage. We didn't have the right tooling either, but most importantly, we didn't feel like we had the skills across the organisation to get the most out of those investments in new technology.
Nice. Okay. How did you go about just creating some of that curiosity in the first place?
So Data Literacy Academy came and you ran a session with us with the data leadership team, and we brought in some key stakeholders as well and talked through the kind of key challenges and put together a plan. We also worked out that this wasn't something that we could deliver in isolation purely from within the data office. So we worked with partners in the communications and the L&D teams in the society, and basically kind of developed a plan with how we were going to communicate the launch of the Data Academy, how we were going to engage people, and then get the buy-in and people signing up to be part of the first cohort.
Brilliant. That segues us nicely actually the next question, really, which is looking at that cohort and the very first cohort, which is pivotal to the success thereafter, really. So what was the thinking and the design behind, I guess, casting quite a wide net with your first cohort, and what was the strategy behind that?
Well, I think everybody was keen to sort of get their team to be part of it. So well, if I just roll back a little bit, we launched the Data Academy with a persona survey. So we promoted that, got people to kind of think about whether they were a data skeptic, data dreamer, data knight, or a data wizard, and then targeted some learning based on those personas. And we'd also done a kind of big launch event at a kind of company-wide event called the CBS Big Picture event. And so that had kind of got a lot of interest, and data was quite a hot topic. So we engaged with the executive team, and we got senior leaders nominated in each of the functions to start thinking about where data would help what they needed to deliver as a function. And I think Data Literacy Academy, you met with each of those leaders and helped to kind of get under the skin of where the data opportunity was in those teams. And then working with each of those nominated people, we got them to basically select people from within their their functions, who they thought were the best fit for the first cohort with Data Literacy Academy. And I used a data-driven approach, so I allocated the places based on the size of the team, so it was like a proportion. Yeah, so every team was represented based on their size.
Brilliant. And so you effectively engaged almost early influential people through like a bit of a hub and spoke model. Can you unpack a little bit how you went around that? So those champions in the senior engagement that you pulled in, how was that worked through?
Well, I suppose, it's the program with Data Literacy Academy is an eight month program, which is that we're using, and I think so. It's a significant investment in people. So we had to kind of sell the vision of why people should go onto the training and what it would enable, and ultimately we could see there were inefficient ways of working within data, that there were areas where we needed to improve trust in data, and also to be innovative with how we use data as well. So I think obviously selling the benefits of this is what we're setting out to achieve as a data office, and if you want to be part of that and set your teams up for success with the skills, then recommend they're part of the academy. I suppose the only other thing just to mention is the Data Academy that we set up. It was the first academy within the society, but I think there's 7 based on future skills that we'd identified as an organisation that we wanted to build out. So, for example, software engineering or UX UI. So the Data Academy isn't in isolation. It forms part of a kind of wider group of academies for future skills across the society.
Yeah, that cohesiveness really pulls through from a kind of development perspective, and that takes it quite nicely into our next question. Actually, is around almost understanding leader and business championship, but partners in the business as well that can enable. And you've referenced L&D in building this out, but how did you bring other leaders on board, and yeah, what role did L&D really play in the adoption of the academy?
Well, I suppose other than the kind of senior sort of leads in each of the functions to kind of nominate who's going to go onto the cohort, we also encouraged senior people to be part of that academy. So in our second cohort at the moment, we've got a senior leader plus her whole team on the cohort. So I think encouraging people at all levels that there's opportunity to improve your data skills, I'd say is a tip. And then from working with L&D, they are experts in learning and development, and I think I've really valued their input into kind of how to engage the learners, how to manage the cohort. I think we've got some really impressive engagement figures, and I think that's really down to the fantastic colleagues that I've got, so Lamia and Abby, who I work really closely with in L&D, so credit to them for everything that they've done on the engagement front.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're almost seeing that kind of buy-in and contributing to the long-term culture change there, and especially as you're building that across different academies. I guess how would you say that L&D support is really helping to drive those completion rates? Is that something you're seeing across the board in all of the academy?
Well, I don't know how the other academies are performing. I'm sure they're doing really well, although I'm not sure any of them won any awards yet. But I think ultimately it's really important that people in the society feel that they have an opportunity to develop their skills, and I think so. Not only do we provide opportunities through Data Literacy Academy, but we also provide opportunities through data apprenticeships as well. So working closely with L&D, we can look at different people, different teams across the organization and identify, what's the best intervention for them to help develop their data skills. And also that includes the data office as well, because, in order to make sure that our team, have the skills that they need to use the new technology, we've invested in our own people as well, encouraged skill development there.
Yeah, brilliant. That really shows that gap between the business and the data teams in itself there. So great. I'm just going to move on to a topic which I'm sure everybody feels is that there's never the right time, because everybody's always busy. There's always a lot happening. Maybe after the next change, this is the right moment to do this. But there is often that tension between we're not ready, but we actually do need to do something. So how did you both navigate that in a business full of organizational change day to day? So perhaps Phil, if you want to start with this, and then we'll hand over to Kate too.
Yeah, no worries. It is really easy to put these sorts of things by the side. Either not do it at all, or do it as a sort of bit part and put it on the side of your desk and just sort of token gesture it. The bottom line is, if strategically you want to make a change within the organization, then you've got to find time and just get on with it. So there is literally never a right time. And therefore, to, I guess, put your foot down and go forward, and make a step in the right direction is absolutely the right thing. And what Kate and the team did, particularly in L&D, was get some confidence behind that. There was a hell of a lot of passion between the three of them as individuals, and drove it. I was sort of happy to share. Initially, I was a bit skeptical, but then what I mentioned earlier was around the why would you, and the fact that people were shying away from asking the curious questions was a driver in of itself. Because if you're shying away from it, you're not going to get the value. You've also got increased risk from not asking the question. So I think the team did an incredible job at driving it. But I sort of reflect on, I guess, my opinion at the time and my opinion now, and Kate and I have had the frank conversation around it. I wouldn't delay. Like that is genuinely sort of my opinion now, is the confidence of folk in the organization has meant the questions have started to come. And if the questions have not started to come in terms of insight questions, then they're asking different curious questions in the space. And for me, that's a fantastic result, regardless. And for our organisation, we need to be more data driven as an organisation. That's a clear strategy of the organisation, and this is a prerequisite for it, in my view.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think that there never would have been a perfect time. I think there was kind of, on one hand, you might think I need to wait until I've got, the new data platform and all the tooling and all our common data sets and everything ready. And then we start, doing the launch of the Data Academy. But, I think that I don't think is the right approach, because you'll never feel ready. On the flip side, we started training people, and, there's an element of frustration that all of the things that they would like to be available aren't available. But then we've got people that know what they want. And to Phil's point, they know the questions that they want to ask. And also, I think there's quite a lot of benefit in putting a little bit of pressure on yourselves as well. So if you start training people and build out that desire in the organization, it drives us as well to build faster and better.
How did you manage those kind of the practical realities of launching things, of what you say if things aren't lined up? How did you manage that from a roadmap perspective and a communications perspective?
Well, I think being clear on what people will have available to them, and I think, much as everyone would like all of the, sometimes we do hear, I just want all the data. Like, wouldn't we all just want all the data? But that isn't the reality. So there are still benefits that people can get. So being aware of the importance of data quality and data governance, and improve, everybody sort of, well, lots of people will, have to produce a report or a chart, and then understanding how you can tell better stories with data. It might not be, like a dashboard that, thousands of people have got access to, but it's still an important thing, that an improvement with how you're using data. So I think being clear with people on what they can do now and what they'll be able to do in the future has been helpful. And I think, we have had some really good feedback from people on, how their confidence has increased with data as a result of the programme.
Sometimes, Danny, I think you've got to say that, have the difficult message as well. Sometimes you've got to say no. But that's often the more transparent thing to do. You set expectations and you say no, but not no forever, no for a period of time. So we've been building foundations for a period of time and have had to slimline the rest of the roadmap. But that means we should be able to accelerate afterwards. So we're doing the foundations alongside building out the confidence and data literacy, so that when we've got the capability to respond more quickly to things, we can, because the questions will be there.
And that transparency is really important, isn't it? If you're asking people to take themselves on a development journey, have you seen positive shifts from business and data team relationships in that transparency as a result of it?
I would say so. It's difficult to, when you're in it, right? It's difficult to say, but I've got quite a lot of relationships around the organisation, and I think I guess the sentiment is a positive one, that we are headed in the right direction. By no means have got to the end destination, and I think we're sort of really clear with our stakeholders of that. But equally, hopefully, we can invite that sort of constructive criticism to allow us to do better anyway. So I think that nature of transparency through our relationships is fundamentally important within the culture of the team.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think, Kate, you mentioned one in terms of some advice, but if someone who's watching their org wasn't quite ready, like what would your advice be?
That's a good question. Well, I think step into the unknown and just start moving forward with it. I always think that if there's something that seems a little bit scary, it's probably something that you should do. And I think improving data skills, is something that I think every organisation should do. You might want to think about the scale that you want to do it, and you might want to target in a particular area. But I definitely just get cracking.
Wow.
Any words of wisdom from you, Phil, there?
Well, it's a little bit of the theme of the day, right? But being curious around this topic. So if we're challenging the rest of the organisation to be curious, why shouldn't we hold ourselves to the same standard? And I'd be curious, to Kate's point, why not start small? Test it, learn it, understand the data from it, and then build out from there. I think for me, that's the narrative, and the curiosity point is there's plenty of people to ask questions to. So build those relationships and ask the questions.
Yeah, perfect. Great. So that moves us on to our next question. And actually, Kate, you touched upon this, where you were saying you're starting to see people maybe work a bit different in terms of their kind of the governance around that, some of the quality. So how did, trust and governance like shape your overall strategy? And then how has the academy kind of reinforced and enabled that already? And what are you seeing from it?
So I think one of the things that really helped with the launch of the Data Academy was that data became a principal risk category in sort of around the same time. So, to use the carrot and stick analogy, the carrot is data enablement and improved access and self-serve, but at the same time, that the stick is that we, need to make sure that we're managing data, data risk as an organisation. So that certainly helped to focus minds and encourage engagement, I'd say. Then we've also, as part of the work that we were doing, building out our platform, introduced Informatica as as our data governance tool. And I think, that has helped, sort of with the whole kind of articulation of what it is that we want to do with data, improving data governance and data quality. And then we've also got the, a data steward and data owner network that's been established. So of course, those people are focused on data governance and data risk, but we also look for them for their input on data opportunity as well. Because those are the people that are kind of, our eyes and ears and really understand, what's going on with data in their functions. And, for example, as we build out the common data sets that the people, will use in future, those are the people that can really help guide what are the key fields and the key information that needs to be available to put their data skills into practice.
And how did you say would the academy helped kind of bridge some of that understanding from, from a governance roles and responsibilities perspective? There's often a misunderstanding of I'm not the data owner, I'm not responsible. So how has the academy almost helped with that?
Well, we work with Data Literacy Academy to provide training, so for data stewards and data owners, and that is under the kind of umbrella of the Data Academy. And I think often people get put into these roles but aren't supported and given the training to really understand the remit of that role. And it's a business standard role. It's not something that we've just invented at Coventry Building Society, and so that's been really helpful. And also within the training that we provide as part of the Data Academy, there's a focus on data governance and data quality, and I think that's kind of one of the foundational elements of data skill that's taught, is that obviously you can do fancy things with data, but if you don't have trust in the data that you're using, then what's the point?
Yeah.
Danny, I think the other things that I would add to that is, firstly, when we're talking about the roles and responsibilities, quite often data owners and data stewards, they're not an independent role. It's not just a role in of itself. They are a business person, typically a business person out in the organization doing a role which happens to be responsible for data at the same time or accountable for it. In those instances, all too frequently, they sometimes don't get allocated sufficient time and space to be able to do all of that learning. So it's really important that you set people up for success, because what I've seen previously is when people aren't clear on their roles and responsibilities, they shy away from their roles and responsibilities. If you're really explicit about them and help people to get there, then you're setting yourselves up for success rather than failure. The other thing I'd add is when we're sort of talking about how does governance and trust play into the strategy, trust specifically is a core part of the data strategy. Without trust in the data, without trust in the people that are using it, like there's sort of politely no point. From a governance perspective as well, we talk about sort of the risk nature of it often comes from up high as an organization. We are a risk averse organization typically. But and therefore that sort of risk aversion will come and be known and have to report back to senior people on the board and through the executive teams, etc., and rightly so, because we need to have sort of our data safe, secure, trusted, etc. But we also talk about sort of the play into a defensive strategy versus a proactive strategy and offensive strategy. And that's where I think actually we need to get better at. We're quite often in a defensive position, but I think data can be used in terms of that curiosity, in terms of advancing and being proactive with it.
Brilliant. And how you've leaned into some like almost community-led development with the owners there themselves. How are you finding they're changing that culture of kind of responsibility and trust and kind of overall reliance on the data?
So I think they're leading that through their teams,
Well,
and that's the having people in a central data office in of itself is useful, but the networks only go so far, and often those data folk have got similar networks to each other. Whereas actually, if you've got those stewards that are embedded in the business and the data owners at a senior level, then your network grows, and therefore your confidence and your conversation can start. And that's where those communities start to come in. And Kate referenced those data owner guilds and communities, and that's where the narrative and the conversation really has to happen. And when people are talking about it more, the confidence and comfort level increases, and that's part of the objective.
yeah, there's your culture change overnight, isn't it? When you're starting to get momentum in those kind of side desk support. Brilliant. So taking us into some of the kind of almost learnings and evolution. So how has the Academy evolved since its first cohort, and what are you applying to the next cohorts and planning going forward?
So we found that there were some people in the first cohort who were, really, really keen to further develop their data skills. So we've seen a number of people move on to data apprenticeships. So that's really good. Then we, in the second cohort that we ran, rather than having the kind of, having representation from all the different functions, we focused on a couple of areas, so commercial and risk. So we had, teams, greater representation from those teams. And then further cohorts, we're similarly going to target other areas. So I think as different data products come online that will be of use to different parts of the organization, we'll focus on those areas. There's also an exciting opportunity where we can offer the Data Academy to colleagues at the Cooperative Bank, which is part of, Coventry Building Society now. So I think there's, how we can broaden the Data Academy offering to everybody at the organisation.
And you mentioned there when data products come online. So is your approach kind of what are we offering from a data perspective and enable the cohorts from that? Or is it led by the kind of cohort demand first? Well, where would you say the shift is?
So we've got our roadmap that identifies the key data products, so the common data sets that will be available. And I think from that we can identify who will be the primary users for each of those common data sets and who's going to have the most benefit from the training. So I guess it's linking back to your roadmap and then targeting your training so that there is some alignment there, because I think much as I think we launched the Academy at the right time. At the same time, we all know that if you do learning, the best thing that you can do is put it into practice to embed that learning. So I think that's what we want to put into practice now for future cohorts.
I think that's what I like most about where we're heading to. There's a nice balance between value and being prepared.
Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about sort of the quantity of change at the society that we've got, and we can see things coming down the track. And part of my job and Kate's job is to lay the foundations ahead of when the teams get there. And part of those foundations are the technical foundations, and part of them are the education foundations, so that the teams feel prepared to take on that change. And then once they've delivered the change, they implement it. And I think there is something good that works nicely about that, but we can't also forget the balance with value. And sometimes you need to go where the highest return on investment is. Yeah, so there's a bit of a balance, but I think that's fine.
Yeah, you've almost got that trifecta where your strategy is informing your change and your change is informing your capability, which shifts you from that offense kind of reactive that you mentioned before. So what kind of lessons do you think you've learned from, I guess, cohort one that shaped those later cohorts?
Well, I think, you know, as you start to build people's data skill, then you encourage more demand to come into the data office, which is a good and a bad thing. and and I think, you know, as Phil sort of mentioned earlier, we've made a conscious effort in 2025 to focus on strategic delivery. And I think, you know, what I don't want to do is to train people and then disappoint them that, you know, we can't provide the data solution that would really help them, you know, in the short term. So I think we kind of, in the first cohort, kind of created that appetite and understanding for why improving data skills was important. But now, you know, we're focusing our efforts and the training on where people are really going to get the value. So I think that's probably the kind of key learning that I've taken, is to kind of target the training for where people will get the most opportunity and value based on the roadmap.
Brilliant. Is there an example to mind where that roadmap or that has kind of helped preempt the change in the direction of the capability for the cohort? Is an example you can pull from?
Well, I suppose, I mean, I wouldn't. I'd say if I talked about, you know, in the second cohort, we focused on the commercial team, and, you know, we did that because we knew that the common data sets that we'd be delivering initially would be really beneficial to that team. We're not saying it's only that team that will benefit, because we think there are multiple areas that would. And I think we're now seeing that the use cases that we're getting from commercial to really make use of what we can offer, they're really good use cases that we can get behind and can see the value that they'll deliver to the organization. You know, not only efficiency improvements, but also getting to deeper insights in the data that weren't available before.
Brilliant. Yeah, that does take us quite nicely actually onto the next topic of value and ROI. And you know, on the topic of ROI, it's usually quite difficult to, you know, directly measure. So how are you kind of seeing and talking about ROI when it comes to data literacy in the academy?
From my perspective, I think, well, as you sort of articulated, Dana, I think it's an incredibly difficult thing. What we're talking really here is about culture. It's a dimension of culture. And with culture, there's so many things that go into it. It's really difficult. It's not like an A/B test that you can sort of scientifically, unless someone has got an answer for this and can point us the way, that'd be great. But actually, there's an element of, you need to look at that change over time. You need to look at and understand the confidence that there is around the business and the willingness to engage, and ultimately the insight that's coming from it. So, are people making decisions based on data is really ultimately the end state measure. And there's a lot of contributing factors to that, including this, but it's not just this. I think I'm a big fan of measure what matters. And I think you could throw a hell of a lot of time and effort into creating something measuring this return on investment when you inherently know it's right anyway. So politely, what's the point? It's more about making sure that we're contributing towards the end state measure, the dial that we're actually trying to shift. How do we get there? And is it positively contributing to it? For me, the simple answer is yes. We're not quite at the end state, right? And we'll continue to need to educate, I think, many folk over a long period of time. But we've got, I'd say we're getting to it, certainly in the society, not necessarily the bank yet, but the critical mass. And I think that's an important part, because that's where it starts to, people feel like they probably have FOMO. They're like, what do you mean you're getting data and insight and I'm not. And there's a bit of, let's try and instill that within people, because everyone's a little bit competitive, right? So they want the access to the best data, and it drives more curiosity.
Yeah, definitely. What about yourself, Kate?
Well, I think, you know, there are clearly measures that you can have on, you know, the engagement of the learners. So, you know, are they completing the course? Are they, you know, are they confirming that they have increased their confidence? You know, what are the kind of ideas that they're getting coming out, having completed the course? So I think, you know, there are those kind of internal value signals that you can look at. And I'd say one of the key ones that we got, and I suppose to Phil's point about FOMO, was that, you know, when it came to our second cohort, you know, it's not like we had to search out people. You know, we had a really big waiting list of people that had said, you know, put their hands up and said, I want to be part of the next cohort. And then we were able to choose the people that we thought it was most relevant to. So I think, you know, that was really good, and, you know, the waiting list continues to build out.
And how did, just pulling back to the L&D relationship there, like how would you say the L&D relationship helped to maintain that momentum and create the buying for future FOMO?
Well, you know, we've used different channels. You know, so, you know, we've got a Viva Engage that we use. So, you know, a community has been set up there to kind of promote the Data Academy and encourage engagement. We've also got a data guild that we're setting up, you know, to sort of provide a home for people who are finishing, you know, with the kind of formal training, so they can be part of a data community and share their ideas. And I think, you know, L&D will also promote the Data Academy, you know, when they're engaging with different departments about the learning opportunities that are available for people, you know, be that you know, a skills, you know, a skills fair, or, you know, the various events that Coventry Building Society provides, you know, to encourage kind of internal mobility and opportunities within the organisation.
Brilliant. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of the things you're starting to see at the moment are those ways of working with teams and how they interact, and the confidence to do so, which again is very, very nice path here. Looking at some of those change behaviors or processes, how is the Academy like influencing change programs that are currently underway or are being planned at the moment?
I think there's two aspects to this in my mind. One is top down. How does it influence change or strategy more broadly, and therefore change? And then bottom up, are people making or deducing the right insights from the right data to be able to inform what change needs to happen? In terms of that first one, I think the strategic planning process that the organisation goes through does absolutely encapsulate information and data to feed those decisions. I think the feedback that I would get if asking the board and the stakeholders would be, can we get more, and can we get it faster, and can we get it iteratively? And that's sort of the work that needs to happen. So I think from a board perspective and an exec perspective, I think that's sort of the way it's heading. And I think the academy feeds that a little bit. So we haven't necessarily targeted the exec and the board, but we have with data owners, and the data owners report into those folk. And I think the more that they're talking about data and the movement of where we are from a data perspective and where our strategy is going, including the academy, I think that will feed into those conversations. And it allows us to have the right conversations with the right people in the strategy teams. And then likewise, from a bottom-up perspective, people's confidence, I keep coming back to it, people's confidence in data and insights specifically mean that more insights come out, more questions are asked, And then the more questions that are asked, the more answers are needed. And quite often answers to these problems, challenges, or opportunities come in the form of, actually, we need to change something in the organization. And that will then feed sort of that change portfolio. And Kate, I think you probably got a good example around the data change impact assessments and how that's sort of driven out over. So I'll let you come in on that point as well.
Yeah, so I think probably lots of people can probably relate to sometimes data can be an afterthought, and something changes in an organization and the data team are expected to, jump to it and solve the problem, having not really been engaged. So that certainly is not the case anymore at Coventry Building Society. So we've got a data change impact assessment that's linked to investment, and I think we're certainly seeing really good engagement from project teams on that. But if we hadn't have had the Data Academy and that raising awareness of data across the organisation, I think it would have been more of a challenge to launch that data change impact assessment. So, with any kind of change to a process, we needed to go around and, brief the teams and the stakeholders. But, we were pushing on an open door because people understand the importance of data and they see it as, as a core function, a core skill within the society. I mean, obviously, it's hard to know because, to Phil's A/B testing, we don't know that. But I feel quite confident that if we hadn't have had the Data Academy, launching the data change impact assessment would have been more difficult.
Yeah. And how are you seeing that the data change impact assessment is almost changing the way that the teams think about the role of data in their projects? What shift are you seeing there?
Well, I think data is so broad, especially if we because we include unstructured data as well as structured data as being impacted by the data change impact assessment. I think people may assume that there's no impact to data, but ultimately we want to know, what is the system change, what is this business change that you're making, and then we can let you know if we think that there is a data governance, a data risk, a data architecture, or a data product implications from what you're changing. So we've provided supporting documentation that makes it clear what the scope of the DCIA is, and how it may the things that they need to consider, and there's a lot of questions to answer. But ultimately, what it comes down to is having a conversation about what's changing and what the implications are in a structured way.
Yeah.
I also think it plays the point of it's not optional.
Yeah.
And I think people have historically, probably me to an extent in my previous role, we can have those as non-functional requirements at the end, and actually that's just not how it most effectively works. And I think we've only implemented it very, very recently, so the full results of it and how it's driven those changes is really difficult to tell. But if I would, early signs are that people understand it needs to be a thing, and then when people need it to be a thing, they start to realize, if I'm not fluent in this space, then I've got a problem. Because I feel unsure and I'm not going to get my project over the line. So people are starting to engage in the topic more as a consequence. For me, it's about, I don't Kate mentioned carrot or stick earlier, or both maybe, but I don't want it to be the full stick approach. But in some instances, we can't get to the end of a project or a change that's happened for multiple months or significant investment and then go, hang on, where was the insight and the data baked into it through the process? Like that can't be a thing.
Yeah. You referred to there, I guess, your own behavior change and mindset change. Like when we spoke about ensuring that to execute the vision, it's from a top-down strategic lens. How are you making sure that's the case in corporate planning then, and that data is seen at that level?
I think it's through the conversations and through the process. So the conversations are pretty simple, if I'm being honest. Like I I don't think I've ever come across anyone that I've had a conversation with and they've said no, data's not important. Like at a senior level, that's just not. I don't think that's a thing anymore. If it is in your organisation, that's quite unlucky. But people do think it's hard, and it can be hard. But I think sometimes we make it harder for ourselves. I think we probably need to simplify that down a little bit. But for me, that's a bit of the narrative, and then the process part puts into if it's not forgettable, i.e., you can't make it happen without it, then people will do it because of the consequence to that. So there is that balance to have. So I think it's a combination of sort of conversation and relationships, which is sort of the softer side, but also the firmer, here's the process, let's follow it.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you. So that takes us on to our next question, because I'm conscious of time. I want to have some Q&A. So on the topic of, I guess, long-term value, which we've spoken about in a few of the other questions, is that we are seeing there's more CDOs in post than ever, but they're often really failing to deliver that long-term value. And I just wondered, Phil, from your view, what do you think's going wrong there, or not quite hitting the mark?
Yes, it's quite a testy question, that one, Danny. There's probably three things that spring to mind, and in different organisations it'll be different. But the first thing, and I've just mentioned it, is about simplicity. When topics are typically hard, I think we need to simplify the hell out of them, and just make it easy to understand and digest, because then we're not putting blockers up or barriers for people to come and have the conversation. I think the next step is around it being business at driver and customer, or member in our case, driver factors first rather than technology factors first. I think if you lead technology, then it remains a technical subject, and I think that's part of the problem. But it can't be a technical subject. It needs to be a subject for everyone. Yes, there's technical aspects of it, but tell me a discipline in a bank particularly, but in any organisation that hasn't got a technical aspect to the job. So that's the second one, and then I guess the third one, probably more controversially, since I've been doing this role, I've had a number of conversations with lots of people around the industry, and I think tenure's like 2 years or something, is it, as a CDO?
Okay.
Like you've got time to do something in that period of time. Absolutely. Have you got time to transform the organization's culture, the technology stack, the service that you offer to the rest of the organization? I'd probably be surprised. And therefore, if that's the average tenure, then I think like either by choice or I think we've got to commit to it. And you've got to see it through, because I think certainly in my time at CBS, we've seen sort of a number of different technical platforms, and we've migrated data from one platform to another and not quite got to the end of it. Whereas I think we need to see it through. It's probably I think that's my job. I think I need to see this through. And that's sort of where I am in terms of, I think if we were going to, as a collective CDO community, see the value, I think it's that long-term value, the simplicity, and being business and member first.
And what does a truly business first data leader look like in practice, would you say? And why is it so rare?
I think it's come historically, data's come from a more technical background. Clearly, it is a technical subject as well, don't get me wrong. But I think there's a commercial grounding that's needed to understand what's the purpose of the organization in the first place, because then you can apply it to the questions that need to be asked, and therefore the capabilities that need to be driven. I think if you know what the organization stands for, or the organization's purpose is, then it stands you in much better stead.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I'm conscious of time, and I want to make sure we answer some of the questions from those in the room. So we've had 2 questions so far, and And the first one was, how did CBS's approach to building out their roadmap, and what do the key milestones look like?
Shall I take that one?
You can do, Kate, and I
Yeah.
can fill any gaps if there are any.
Clearly there are going to be deliverables that relate to other business projects, but also, from the business case that we have to invest in our data ecosystem, so our new platform, and the kind of the key things that will kind of make the shift in the data culture. So the roadmap is a kind of a combination of what's coming from outside of the data office that's needed to deliver the overarching CBS strategy. So a new mortgage offering, for example, and a new platform. And then what we will be delivering as part of the new data ecosystem. And then the third element is integration, and how we integrate our between Coventry Building Society and the Cooperative Bank from a data perspective.
I think broadly as well, Danny, probably a bit of a one-trick pony here, but when I built out the digital capabilities of the society, we used a sort of 3-stage format that helped us get there. And the first stage was building the sort of solid or brilliant foundations. Then it was sort of scaling it. Yeah, so making sure it wasn't just in some basic elements of it. And then it was about sort of being ready for the future. So having the agility within that. I don't think it's any different when it comes to this topic. Kate's just referenced a couple of things that are coming by the side, and I think you've got to be agile to that. But for me, it's fundamentally about we are building a capability here within the society that will be fit for the future, and I think the same was in digital.
Yeah, that really echoes that simplicity that you mentioned in our previous question in terms of the stages there. We have another question that says this resonates with regards to the impact assessment, and the question was, who carries out the data change impact assessment? Is that someone from data, or have you trained a transformation or change team to do that?
Question. Do you want me to take that, Kate, or do you want to?
You take
I'll
it,
give it
Phil,
a
and then yeah.
So yeah, it's from the data office, but it's not just one person. So it comes into the data office after a change kickstarts at something we called sort of at a value case level. Then when it comes in, it's sort of assessed or triaged is probably the best way to put it, using the different capabilities within the data office. So there's elements of risk and governance, there's elements of architecture and design, from a product perspective, and also from a technical angle as well. So there's different capabilities that we have at CBS within the data office, and we all work in, I guess, in my leadership team, and therefore those teams or individuals representing those teams come together to give it a view, and then work with the data owners and data stewards who have a critical part to play in this in that process.
Brilliant. Anything to layer on there, Kate, or did Phil smash that?
Well, absolutely. On the process, I suppose the person who fills in the form is generally a business analyst from outside of the data office. So they need to do the initial legwork, but clearly we'll provide the support and guidance to provide that information, and then it's working together to find the right solution.
Perfect. So we'll just take us to our last question, which we've got 2 minutes to go, which is a nice little reflection for everyone. So what's the one thing that you wish you knew earlier in your journey, and what advice would you give to data leaders starting out on an academy?
Do you want me to go, Kate?
Yeah, you go.
Cool. I would suggest, and I said I was a one-trick pony earlier, I'm going to prove it here. It's a simplicity point for me. It's don't try to overcomplicate things. I think if you understand it well enough, you can simplify it to someone else so that you can explain it, and then that confidence increases, and then the deep technical understanding or the richer understanding can build from there. What you can't do is flip that and say, here's a load of information, but you don't have a clue on how it fits or has got context. So yeah, from my perspective, I think the important thing is to try and simplify absolutely everything.
Brilliant. Thank you. What was yours, Kate?
I think from my perspective, I think trying to kind of have that clearer vision and roadmap so that you can get that alignment, but it's never going to be perfect. So I think, in hindsight, I do wish that I'd had more of a future vision of what was going to happen, but then I didn't have a crystal ball, and things, you do get curveballs that come along that you weren't expecting. But I think perhaps, having that vision and that roadmap and then an alignment with your cohorts would be a really good tip.
Brilliant. Great. Well, right on the money for time, but yeah, I really enjoyed talking through this. I have the luxury of speaking to you guys quite frequently, but we never dig into some of this how we have here. So I hope those watching will take some really great insights and learnings, and hopefully those that were on the maybe or the no poll at the start can start to make some steps to build their own academy. But if there are any questions after, feel free to reach us at Data Literacy Academy, and I'm sure Phil and Kate wouldn't mind some contact on their LinkedIn if you've got any questions about them specifically. So thank you for your time today. And yeah, hopefully see you in some future webinars. Great.
Thanks, Danny. Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.